According to the theory of evolution, the origin and development of the universe and all its systems can be explained solely on the basis of time, chance, and continuing processes. All living things have arisen from a single-celled organism. A second and opposing worldview is the concept of creation. According to the theory of creation, everything in the universe has come into being through the design, purpose, and deliberate acts of a supernatural creator. That means this creator created the universe, the earth, and all life on earth, including all types of plants and animals, as well as humans. On today's edition of Origins, we'll be analyzing an outdated theory.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to Origins. My name is Don Chapman, and I'm your host. Origins is a forum where we take the evidence of science and we use it to validate the truth of creation. And we have a guy with us today who is an excellent guest to help us do that. His name is Ralph Muncaster, and I just was so impressed with your book. Today we're going to be talking about the subject of evolution being outdated. Apparently there's more information today than there was in 1925?
Yes, absolutely. What's happened is we have learned so much with recent breakthroughs in molecular biology and also in astrophysics that now we can really find out what was necessary for the original start of life. But I think it's really important to get a sense of some foundation before we really get into some of the great specifics that we can talk about.
Well, if you're an engineer, you're the perfect guy to build the foundation. So do that for us, friend.
Okay. Let's start out with, essentially, if we're going to talk about the existence of life, the first thing we have to realize is that life either came about through natural random development, which we call today evolution, or it came about by some form of intelligent design, which we would call, of course, creation.
So those two are mutually exclusive.
They're mutually exclusive. It had to have been one or the other. So because of that, if you could essentially prove one, then you could prove the other one to be false. Or if you could disprove one, the other one would have to be true.
Okay.
Now, it's important to understand that creation is a theory that requires faith. I think everybody understands that. If we're dealing with something that someone would term to be from God or an ultimate supreme intelligent designer, I think everyone understands that there's an element of faith that's there. What people sometimes fail to recognize is that evolution also is something that requires faith. Think about it. If we're talking about a cell becoming a fish becoming a bird, whatever, leading up to an eventual human being, there's an enormous amount of faith.
It's not all facts. There's a lot of believing in there.
There's a lot of believing, and we'll talk about some of the problems in that area of
so
believing.
We have two theories.
We have two different theories.
All right.
And one of the issues that we need to deal with is this whole issue of hard science versus soft science.
Now, in your book, those terms intrigued me. Help me to understand.
Okay. Hard science, of course, is, let's start with soft science. Soft science would be science used by paleontologists and people that study fossils or anthropologists. Soft science imagines things. They draw pictures. They tell stories. Now, these picture stories can be used to say anything from a fish becoming a frog, even a frog becoming a prince.
So when they're telling stories, they're making things up and saying this might be true.
It's speculation.
But it's very different than a scientific law or scientific fact.
Yes, it's speculation. You can tell a story about anything. Now, hard science, on the other hand, we're talking about sciences like physics, engineering, mathematics. Now, these use hard facts and mathematics. What these sciences do are they'll do things like predict eclipses, they'll build bridges, they'll send men to the moon. We put our lives, our very lives, in the hands of hard scientists every day of our lives.
Ralph, do you feel like sometimes the evolutionists take their credibility from hard science and sort of transfer it to the soft science?
They certainly give the implication that what they're doing is hard science, when in fact what they're doing is something very different from that.
All right, show us what you got there.
But let's move on. So we have to realize that evolution is something that is faith-oriented as well. And as I stated before, both creation and evolution can't be true. If we can prove one, we disprove the other. So we're going to be talking about what we can prove and what we can't prove. Now, the first thing I want to point out is this whole area of disproving God. Can we prove or disprove God? Well, what's involved in proof? First of all, if we were to try to imagine the whole world is a world of deaf people. So we have something that you can't see. We have something that we, of course, know as fact, this area of sound. Now, we know it's fact, but if we're trying to prove something that no one can hear because everyone's deaf, we have to create arguments about whether or not sound exists. Now, of course, the issue is, are they valid arguments? And can we draw true conclusions? If they're valid arguments and we can also draw true conclusions, we can virtually prove the existence of sound.
All right.
Now, there are actually ways that you can prove the existence of God based on the types of proof human beings use using statistics, and we get into areas of prophecy for that. If we were to move on, we can look at evolution. Now, evolution is something that it is possible. It is possible to disprove evolution. Now, how is it possible? It's possible because we can apply laws of probability using statistics to disprove evolution. And in my book, I write about that. Today, we're not going to be talking about so much of the mathematics of it. We do that in another show. But it is possible to disprove evolution, and that is something that we need to keep in mind. Now, let's talk about what evolutionists themselves say. I think it's fair to give them at least a voice. Now, some of the evolutionists, you'll recognize some of these names: John Maynard Smith, George Williams, David Buss, Richard Dawkins, of course, very familiar to many people, Steven Pinker, and others. What are they saying themselves about evolution? Well, let's start with Charles Darwin. He said, natural selection can act or work only by the preservation and accumulation of infinitesimally small inherited modifications. Okay, so there had to be a gradual change.
Process.
A process.
Right.
In a later presentation, I'll be talking about something called irreducible complexity. And to give you an idea of what that is, it's the idea of something like your eye. Your eye has millions of very complex components. They all had to come together at once. Your eye would not work if you had one come together at a time. And there's no process to make them gradually occur at a time. It all had to happen at once. It's irreducibly complex. So Darwin had a problem with the eye, and he's pointing that out. Darwin also talked about a problem with the fossil record. By this theory, he says, innumerable transitional forms must have existed. Why do we not find them embedded in countless numbers in the crust of the earth?
So even with Darwin, there are doubts.
He started out with doubts. He had many of them. These are not the only doubts that he had. It's throughout his literature. Then we move to John Maynard Smith. He's probably the most famous or the most significant evolutionist today. Now, he says that John Maynard Smith said that there are 8 essential transitional steps, that any one of which we would not have life as we know it today. And every single one of these steps, he expresses concerns, doubts, and problems with it. And I mention these in my book. Things like the theory of evolution does not predict that organisms will get more complex. What? It doesn't predict they'll get more complex? How do you go from a little silly bacteria cell with only about 100,000 base pairs, rungs of a DNA ladder, how do you go from that to a human being with 3.2 billion base pairs? Doesn't that imply additional complexity? It does to me. Here you have the leading evolutionist that's writing the books that teaches the teachers, saying it does not predict that organisms will get more complex. There's a problem there. For the present, this is referring to one of his steps. For the present, we have to accept that the origin of molecules with unlimited heredity is an unsolved problem. He can't solve that problem, okay? If any one of these problems is unsolved, the whole theory fails. This is just one. He goes on for every one of these with problems. He says to explain the genetic code's origin and evolution is a major challenge. He can't even explain it. He's the expert. He's having problems. Richard Dawkins wrote the famous book, The Blind Watchmaker. Now, he has problems. He makes gross assumptions. Lee Spetner, who has done a lot of research in this book, he says, Dawkins talked about chance, but he didn't calculate the chance of anything, nor did he cite anyone who did. He just assumed that cumulative selection could lead to macroevolution. He assumed what I have shown to be impossible. Spetner has a PhD. He's a mathematician, statistician. He shows it to be impossible. Dawkins didn't calculate a thing or quote anybody else who did. He said, without justification, each was simple enough relative to its predecessor to have arisen by chance. He just assumed it. He didn't give you any reasons to assume it. Richard Goldsmith, who's passed on, this is kind of the essence of the problem here. He makes a statement first saying evolution of the animal and plant world is considered by all those entitled to judgment to be a fact for which no further proof is needed. Now that's just a statement, right?
Yes.
Then he says, it is true that nobody thus far has provided a new species or genus, etc., by macromutation. It is equally true that nobody has produced even a species by the selection of micromutation. So he says nobody's done it, we don't see evidence of it, but it just says it's fact.
It's amazing to me that we can say that if you don't agree with me, you're not entitled to judgment. But go ahead.
Yes.
Gould's interesting.
Gould, of course, very famous, is also a late person, but he said, I think I can see what is breaking down in evolutionary theory, the strict construction of the modern synthesis with its belief in perversion, adaptation, gradualism, and extrapolation by smooth continuity from causes of change in local populations to major trends and transitions in the history of life. In other words, this is the essence of the theory of evolution, and he's saying that it's breaking down. He's admitting it.
Right.
Let's talk about some myths, common myths. Macro or microevolution versus macroevolution. Now, microevolution is change within existing DNA. Macroevolution is change from one species to another.
And we all believe in microevolution.
The Bible, there's nothing wrong with microevolution.
Change within the species.
I have blue eyes. A lot of people have brown eyes. Some people are tall, some are short. All these are changes, microevolutionary changes.
But one kind doesn't change into the other.
No. But, you know, one thing can be favored in an environmental change. God has given that ability to adapt to environment.
That's exactly
so that
right.
people and other creatures can
Tell
survive.
us about the moths.
The peppered moth, a famous example of that. When the bark in a village was light, the moths could either be white or black. The white moths predominated because the black moths could be easily picked off by predators. Pollution came along. the trees got dark, the population shifted to black moss because they were protected. Then later, when pollution was cleaned up, it went back to white. Evolutionists will say that this is evidence of a species change, when in fact all it is microevolution.
It's adaptability. That's
Homology is the idea that you can have similar things in different creatures, meaning they all have the same ancestors. For example, a dog elbow, a bat elbow, and a human elbow mean we all have the same ancestors. It's like the story I was telling you. You can draw a picture even showing how this change happened. All it is a picture. I could tell you the same kind of story of things that are obviously designed. I could create a little story saying that a skateboard wheel evolved into a bicycle, which evolved into an automobile. See how easy it is to tell the story? But we know that these were all designed. An intelligent designer would use the same mechanism for different things if it works. Why wouldn't it be true with life as well? Embryology is another thing. For a while, people were saying, well, we can look at embryos and see similarities, therefore it means they all came from the same ancestor. What does that mean? I mean, a good designer might have a similar process.
Absolutely.
And actually, the original ones ended up, the original pictures were a hoax anyway, but we don't even need to deal with that. We have the Miller-Urey experiments where a few amino acids were claimed to be the breakthrough in the building blocks of life. Well, initially a couple were developed in an environment that was supposed to simulate early Earth. We find out that even the environment was wrong. But even producing a couple amino acids would be like producing a couple specks of ink and saying, now we've proven that evolution created the Encyclopedia Britannica. In other words, it doesn't prove a thing. It's a small little component of the big picture. Analyzing design just by simple observation, we can know when something's designed. For example, Monkey Rock in Oregon, it looks like a monkey, but does that mean it's designed? No, it's pretty obvious. We can move to Mount Rushmore. Obviously, we can see design, we can see purpose. Then we can go to the complexity of living things. When we look at things like a watch, we know that it's designed. There's no doubt about that. Has not evolved. Now, in 1 second, the human eye does what it would take a Cray 2 supercomputer, the best computer we have in the land, hundreds of years to do. But your human eye can do it in 1 second.
Think of the complexity of that.
Amazing design,
Tremendous, yes.
Amazing complexity. Other things we just don't think about. The heart pumps 60 million gallons of blood in a lifetime, and it doesn't shut down. We don't go in and, for most people, go in and have to, give maintenance to the heart. It repairs itself, it takes care of itself, it does all this stuff by itself. Amazing evidence of incredible design. If we look at things like our blood system, we just take these things for granted. Did you know there are 60,000 miles of blood vessels all precisely arranged in your body to reach every single cell, giving it its necessary oxygen? The brain's capacity equals 500 miles stacked of books. Incredible. We can look at just something like reading a person's DNA at a rate of about 3 items per second would take us 137 years just to read the DNA. Or let's take the DNA in a human being's body. If you were to unravel it, stretch it out, put it end to end, it would literally stretch out of the solar system. That's how much information is stored.
That's incredible.
In your body. One cell, we have to remember, all of this came from one cell, all perfectly orchestrated and directed to create a human being. Incredible evidence of design.
We got to take a break right now, so don't go away. We'll be right back. God bless you.
Creation versus evolution. You weigh the evidence. The archerfish, aim, spit, and catch. The archerfish is famous for its ability to shoot down insects with a well-aimed spit of water, calculating where its prey will fall. The archerfish has a reaction time twice as fast as the average human. The brain of this fish is capable of complex mathematics, including trigonometry and calculus. Yet evolutionists tell us that the archerfish is just another product of millions of years of random chance processes. Remarkable. Today's guest on Origins, Ralph Muncaster, is also the author of several books including Dismantling Evolution and Creation versus Evolution. Book orders are being taken at 1-714-628-8767. Ralph Muncaster is also the founder of Evidence of God Ministries and has written many books that help people with belief struggles. For more information about our guest, you can write to Evidence of God Ministries, PMB number 108, 2560 East Chapman Avenue, Orange, California, 92869. Or visit their website at www.evidenceofgod.com.
Hello, my friends, and welcome back from our break. I'm here with my good friend Ralph Muncaster, and he's just given us an incredible demonstration of the complexity of creation that really makes evolution pretty much an obsolete theory. And you've got on the screen there, friend, a quote from Dr. Michael Gross, who is an evolutionist, but he says some interesting things that I'd like for you to point out with us as we begin to wrap it up.
Yes, I find this very interesting because he wrote a book entitled Travels to the Nano World, and he talks about, interestingly, he talks about this incredible design. Right. In our nano means, you know, a billionth of an inch, or, you know, it's to the billionth power. Essentially, he's saying that we're talking about small, you know, parts of DNA molecules. That's how small he's getting. Okay. So it's really incredibly small technology. And, you know, for example, an ATP motor, which there are hundreds of them in a cell, these little tiny motors run at about 100 revolutions per second, never breaking down, creating new ones. It's just incredible machinery. And someone like Dr. Michael Gross is realizing this, and many other people are too. As a matter of fact, the government's funding a lot of research in the nano world right now. But what he says, and this is an evolutionist talking, he says, nothing ever produced by human engineering efforts comes anywhere near the performance of these biological systems. Okay, so he's admitting we can't even come close. He says, for example, biomolecules which are found within every living cell can carry out the most amazing tasks. He says, it will become clear that nature's superiority is much more obvious in the nanoscale than in large-scale engineering. And throughout his entire book, he talks about incredible design in human beings and in living systems. However, this is an evolutionist. He says how wonderful evolution is to have had such design in it. That sounds like an oxymoron if I have ever heard one.
You know, Ralph, it sounds to me like Dr. Gross is on a collision course with the truth. And I just want to say to our viewers out there, you know, evolution might have made some sense back in 1920 when we thought that life was rather simple, and if you just got the right chemicals together in a soup that maybe you could produce life. But as we see the complexity of life, and as we look through the microscope, and now as we look into the nanoscope of things, and we see how marvelously God has made us, and how complex life is itself, and especially human life. It just seems to me that that this theory is just, it becomes more nonsensical all the time. I want to thank you for being with us, and I want to thank you. You know, I just praise God for men like you and the research and the study you've done. You're a tremendous blessing to the church. I want to say to our folks once more that if you haven't read Dismantling Evolution, Building a Case for Intelligent Design. I highly recommend it. I also want to say to you that if you have questions, write to me at Origins CTV, Wall PA 15148, and also check out our website there and communicate to us through email. Any questions, any comments you have, we'll be glad to answer them. And if I can't answer them, we'll draw on the expertise of folks like Ralph, and we'll get you the information you need. Friends, I just want to remind you of the most basic of truths, and that is that God's view is that He created you. And that ought to be your worldview too. Come back next time and we'll investigate some more of God's truth that validates the truth of creation here on Origins. God bless you.
Thank you for watching this edition of Origins. If you'd like a copy of the PowerPoint information presented today, you can download a PDF file of program number 444 from our website at www.originstv.org. Or for a DVD of this series, send a $12 donation to cover shipping and handling and write to Origins program number 444, Cornerstone Television, Wall, Pennsylvania 15148.
Origins is made possible by the faithful prayers and the financial support of you, our Cornerstone Television family.